Hi, this is Jake Holhouse with HH Insurance. Just wanted to say thank you for being a valued customer of HH Insurance. And today we wanted to talk about the claims process with two of our claim partners here. We're going to do a video just kind of talking through a couple claim scenarios on it. And one thing within the video is that these are purely our personal opinions. They're not a representation of any of our companies, as well as any advice given on it is general overview advice, not specific to a claim. If you have a specific claim question, please reach out to your adjuster or your agent to be able to help you through that process. But with that, we'll go ahead and start the video and talk about what the claim process typically looks like if a homeowner's claim happens. Before we get started, we brought in two of our partners of HH Insurance, Glen, who's a claims manager, and Mike, who is a restoration manager. So with that being said, we'll get started. And Glen, you know, customer has a claim. They walk into their house the day after work. They found that their toilet line broke, their second floor bathroom is flooded all the way down to the first floor, and their house is, you know, a water park. What happens and what should they do at that point when that happens?
Absolutely, Jake. I think the most important thing that I would stress immediately is documentation. So there's going to be a lot of things that are happening. They're going to have plumbers out to the home potentially. They're going to be incurring cost of parts. Make sure that they're keeping all those. And I'd advise every customer to make sure they have a little folder on their computer or at their home where they can just document all that. The second thing I'd recommend is take a look at your policy. Make sure that now use this as an opportunity to know who your insurer is, make sure your mortgagee is updated, know who your sales agent is. Know those parties, because when you have a claim, you don't want to be struggling to find those things. Second thing I'd recommend is you want to start to think about, do I need EMS? Do I need emergency services, water mitigation in particular? When you get those pros involved, they're going to guide the process and they're going to tell you, hey, is this something where I need to file a claim? Maybe this is something that I can handle on my own. But I think that they're a really good resource. If you decided that maybe we're speaking to a very large situation here, you may want to get that claim filed immediately. But if you're still considering that decision, documentation is going to be key. And when I say documentation, to be specific, photos, videos, receipts, paper trail. So I think all of those become very, very important to just make sure that if you do file a claim, there's no issues with coverage there.
So Mike, Belfour gets dispatched on the claim. Customer calls you after they see the water damage to their house. What typically happens next?
So as soon as I receive the phone call, I try to figure out what the cause of the water damage, where it came from. We always want to know how much water is there and if it's black water or just standard clean water. Let's find out their deductibles to make sure what we're doing is going to be cost effective. Then I will send out some guys to go out and take a look at it, and they can call me back and let me know where we think it's at money wise, and we just go from there.
So Glen, one of the questions we get from customers a lot is on, they get their adjustment and shows a replacement cost value and an actual cash value, and assuming that their policy has the replacement cost endorsement. Can you kind of explain how that works and maybe what recoverable depreciation is within the claim?
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. So I think that one of the basis of that question that's important to understand is that when we're adjusting a claim, one of the first things we have to do is decide, or rather figure out, what today's value is. And what I mean by that is, a very simple example is, let's say we have, just using a piece of personal property, a TV. If we have a TV that's 10 years old, someone might have spent $2,000 to $3,000 on it. That same TV today might only cost $400 or $500. The first step to making that actual cash value versus recoverable depreciation determination is, what does the item cost today? So I use a TV in this example because if that TV was a lot of money in the past, it might be less today, but that can easily flip and things can cost more today, on the construction side in particular. So when we're first investigating the claim, we're going to figure out what is the replacement cost value. From there, we're going to move to say, well, hey, based on the age and condition of whether it's a TV or a piece of drywall, a piece of floor, everything is going to be assigned a life. And once we've determined that and we've looked at the age and condition of that piece, we're going to then tell you, hey, based on its age and condition, it's lost this percentage of value. So it might lose something like up to 100%, but a lot of items are at a point in time, so they're worth a certain amount. That amount that's lost due to age and condition is what we would call the depreciation. So when you're getting your initial check, a lot of policies are going to offer you actual cash value up front. If you're endorsed for what's called replacement cost value, once you either replace the item, so you buy a new TV, you're eligible for that value back, Or with your home, when you have the repairs done, you're able to get that value back. So that's the difference between those two things. Some policies are actually only endorsed for actual cash value, meaning that you're only going to get what the item's worth today based off its lost value due to age and condition, and that is what you'd be entitled to under your policy.
So Mike, if a customer comes home, they find, a lot of damage to their house, it looks like, whether it's water or another cause of loss. One of the things that can sometimes happen is a customer goes to Google to find a restoration company. If they are going to Google and they're finding somebody, what are some of the things that you would suggest to look for selecting the right restoration company?
Good question, Jake. I suggest that you look for a national company. Go to the Googles and just don't look for 2 or 3 Google reviews. Maybe go to a company that has 50 or 60 reviews. Go from there. Also, I would check with my agent. I would check with my carrier, see who they're working with, see if they can refer a professional to you.
Glenn, typically what we see is that there's kind of a couple parties involved in a claim. Typically you have your claims adjuster, you've got potentially a field inspector, and then also potentially a contractor that's going to complete the work on the house. Can you explain, kind of how that works to a customer, to kind of explain the different parties that are involved within the claim process?
Absolutely, Jake. So I think that this question is a little carrier specific. So for our customers out there, I just want to make you aware that these parties are likely to be involved in a lot of claims that you'll see, but some carriers have a bit of a different model for how they approach claims. But with that said, a field adjuster's role is going to be the person who actually comes out and inspects your home. They're going to be doing things typically like taking measurements. If you have a damage to your roof, they'll be getting up onto your roof. They're going to be the ones on site answering a lot of questions about what they saw, what damage did they find. They're even able to answer a lot of times, what do they expect the repairs to entail? The inside adjuster works in conjunction with them. They're really partners in the claims process. And what the inside adjuster does is they take that packet that field adjuster creates on site. So all those measurements, all those photos, all those line items that they do within the estimating system, and they pass that along to the inside adjuster for a review. What that inside adjuster focuses on is your policy. So they're going to be looking at things like your limits, your deductible, your coverages, and what you're entitled to based on that inspection. Those two parties work hand in hand. So they're talking. If there's any confusion, they're going to reach out to each other, make sure that they get it right for you. And then that last part is the really critical step too. Once the inside adjuster and the field adjuster have collaborated, written the estimate, and delivered that to you, you're going to then need to get to a contractor stage. That contractor is going to look over that estimate, make sure that they're in agreement, and if they're not, there's always going to be a supplement process that's going to be explained to you. And that supplement process is going to be very similar to how the field adjuster works. Contractor comes out, they take a look at the damage, they take their own photos, they write their own estimate, and if there's any differences, they're going to get in touch with that inside adjuster and that field adjuster and make sure that those are rectified. So those three parties, in an ideal scenario and in a lot of scenarios, they're working together to make sure that the customer gets enough to get their home repaired.
Mike, one of the challenges that we'll see in a claim is that a lot of times the policy is a replacement cost policy, meaning like, kind, quality, and value. And a customer wants to upgrade their countertops or their cabinetry to kind of an upgrade within that process. What do you typically see with that, and how do you work with a customer in that case? Typically what we would see is the policy doesn't pay for the upgrades, but what if the customer does want to make some upgrades along that process?
That's a great question, Jake. It happens quite often. And we'll go with countertops like you mentioned. Somebody asked for Formica countertops, now they want to go with granite countertops. Well, in their claim, they are only going to get paid for their Formica countertops. So we can do the granite countertops, but there is a difference and they would pay that out of pocket.
Glenn, sometimes the popular opinion that we see is when there's a dispute, I need to, take action against my carrier. And a lot of times what we see as an agent is that a lot of times things just get lost in translation, and that there's really a lot of times simple ways to work with your carrier to be able to settle a dispute. If a customer feels that their claim isn't being handled the way that they want it to, or they just don't understand parts of it, what are some resources that the customer has to be able to help settle that?
Great question, Jake. I'd say the first thing that I think is very important for a customer is make sure that you understand the estimate or the coverage decision that was made on your claim. And that might sound obvious, but I've heard customers, and it always pains me to hear that they haven't read their letter or they haven't taken a look at their estimate. And sometimes that's because the adjuster hasn't explained it to them. I'd love to say the adjusters get it right every time, but we know mistakes are made. The first thing I'd say is make sure that you have a copy of the coverage decision and the estimate. That's your foundation. With that, get an expert on site of your own. If you're going to need your roof done, get a roofer out. Get somebody to start there, have them give you an estimate, and have them tell you what they saw up there. I always say that verbals are a little tricky, so if you ever have a contractor out, have them give you something in writing. Have them something that you can refer back to, because sometimes you hear things, it's a little different when they write it down. So just make sure that you have that in writing, and I think now you're in a position to go back to your adjuster and say, hey, I know you told me that my roof was really old, it needs to be replaced, but my contractor's telling me he found wind damage up there. That's going to be a good conversation. Now, it might end up with the carrier saying, hey, we didn't find any wind damage, but they might be able to point you to specific photos, specific things they did that dispelled that theory that there was wind up there. I can tell you that our adjusters are well trained in identifying damage both on site and through photographic means. And if there's any gray area, we defer to the customer. We're going to give the customer the benefit of the doubt 100% of the time. I think that if there's ever truly a contentious situation, that's where your agent might be a helpful resource too. Tell your agent, hey, could you take a look at this? Our agents are happy to get additional reviews done, and they're happy to answer questions that way. But I can tell you that at the end of a claim, whether we pay a customer or not, the most important thing for me is that they understood what they were entitled to and that they got every dollar they were entitled to. And we don't want to tell someone they're not covered, but we have to honor that policy. And at the end of the day, the least thing we're going to give you is education in your policy. Make sure you understand why we came from the way we did.
Glenn, to piggyback on that, I think it kind of goes to one of Mike's points, right? Is when picking the contractors to give you those estimates, it's really, you as the customer probably want to vet that contractor well, make sure that they have the high reviews and that they are, a reputable contractor, not just contractor found on Google.
Yeah, and if I could just add one other layer to that, Jake, I think that the question was in direct relation to public adjusters and attorneys, and I'm not going to ever speak ill of others in other industries, but what I would say is that make sure you read those contracts. I hear a lot of stories about people signing contracts with a public adjuster or an attorney that are very ironclad, is the word that I would use here. They're very locked in, once they sign these contracts, and I'm not, again, dissuading anybody from doing that, but I really encourage people before they sign a contract with an assignment of benefits or a contractor that you read that contract. And if you're ever confused, again, your adjuster, your sales agent, your friends, these are all good parties to run that by before you get locked into something that can go sideways for you. And we just want to make sure that you're protected and that you're educated. I really think a theme of what we're doing here is education.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that our customers understand, and anytime they're entitled to something or they're confused or anything in between, we want to be the party that guides them down the right route. So I just say contracts can be they're easy to sign, they're hard to get out of. So just make sure you understand what you're committing to.
Mike, anything that you want to add on that?
Touching on what Glenn is talking about, if a contractor ever comes to you and they say that we're going to take care of your deductible for you, run. Because that's not good. It just shows distrust and not a very good business practice.
The story that we have of a customer is, they had a hurricane claim, and in the claims letter it was an older roof, and so it had a lot of the claim in recoverable depreciation. Well, they saw it as they weren't getting paid their full claim, and what could have been resolved probably in a phone call with an adjuster turned into a public adjuster getting involved, and now 2.5 years later they still don't have a new roof because now it's in a dispute, and yet in just a simple phone call it probably would have been resolved, as the recoverable depreciation was about $25,000, and that's what they're disputing is the $25,000. But now part of her claim is lost because she's paying a public adjuster fee, and now she has no insurance because the repairs haven't been done, and she still has no roof, and her house is where she wants to live, and yet she can barely live there with active roof leaks. So I think really a lot of dispute resolution can happen between just an understanding with the customer and their claims adjuster.
What I would just add to what you said is, yes, I think that claim that you've painted is one of the nightmare scenarios. And as a carrier, we hate to hear that, because that's a customer that they went through something, that obviously is adversarial in nature. But I think that the sad part is that it could have been avoided. And I think that that customer, if you're ever in a position like that and you're thinking, I've got to get a public adjuster, I've got to get an attorney, I really encourage you to exhaust all means with the carrier first. And what I mean by that is, let's have that conversation with the adjuster. Adjusters work hand in hand with their management team. So the managers are looking over contentious situations. But I really encourage you, before you get down a route of where you're in a 3-year process, where even if that customer, let's say, gets all the money they think that's coming their way and they're entitled to that, it still took 3 years of their life. And that emotional toll that can take on a family I'd never want to put a customer through that. So I really encourage you to make sure that you understand what the carrier is offering, make sure that they've laid that out for you, they've sent you everything. And if you're still not happy, that's where you maybe consider those alternative means.
Absolutely. Mike, one thing that we hear a lot is, a customer has damage and they're not sure whether or not it's going to be within their deductible. So they're not sure whether they want to file a claim yet. In those cases, is that something where they could reach out to you and basically have your team come look at doing a repair and seeing kind of where it lines up to their deductible?
Most certainly, Jake. That's going to happen when we first get on site. We're going to take a look and inspect the entire house where the damage might be. We're going to collaborate and see how much it costs. We want to know the client's deductible, and if it's barely over their deductible, they may not want to make a claim. They just may want to pay it out of pocket. So it's always good to know, to have that knowledge of your deductible before you're going into the damage.
Absolutely. So, well, awesome, guys. Really appreciate the collaboration and the feedback. And so, just as a reminder, anything in this video is purely our personal opinions, not a representation of our companies, as well as this is a general overview and not specific to a claim. And so, if you have a specific claim question, definitely reach out to your adjuster or your insurance agent to be able to help you with that. And so, thanks so much, and really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake.